Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about Tony Blinken's infamous US led or rules based international order. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and we're going to talk about Tony Blinken. He's been yapping lately about the rules based international order, the US led order. Let's talk about it, and I'm going to quickly define it. Let's start off. Let's look at an article, one of the articles that has motivated me. I got two articles. We're going to start with this one. Blinken says China threatens the US led liberal world order. Okay, so we look at that. He's claimed that China is seeking to become the dominant world power, wants to replace the US led liberal order. When asked by the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg if Russia or China is the bigger threat, China's the bigger threat, right? So here he says, I think they want a world order, but the world order that they seek is profoundly illiberal in nature. Ours is liberal with a small L, and that's the fundamental difference. When asked what he thinks China wants, Blinken said, I think that what it seeks is to be the dominant power in the world militarily, economically, diplomatically. Oh man, that guy's looking in the mirror, isn't he? While Blinken claims China seeks global hegemony like the US, the Biden administration's China policy is focused on preventing Beijing from becoming the hegemon in Southeast Asia by increasing support for Taiwan and looking to challenge China South. Okay, so that's the article. Let us chat about that. Okay. Liberal world order, US led world order, rules based international order. What the heck does that mean? Right. I think people, understand the US led world order, what that means, world hegemony. The US is in power. The US runs the world. But let's look at it a different way. The United States is 4% of the world's population. A US led world order means what? Let's just make it clear what that means. It means minority rule. It means that a country that has 4% of the world population gets to lead the world. Now, what does lead mean? Does it mean provide an example? Right? My dad's old saying, children don't listen, they watch and learn. Right? He would always say that. It doesn't matter what you tell your kids. Right? If you tell your kids you should be kind and gentle, and you scream and they see their mother and father yelling and screaming and fighting all day, they ain't going to be kind and gentle. They're going to do what they see. They're going to watch and learn. Hey, don't do this. They don't care what you tell them to do. They're going to do what they see you do. And, we can see me, lots of other people, the older you get as you go, you'll find yourself when you grow up as an adult using the same language, using the same phrases, using the same terms, cooking some of the same meals, keeping your house in the same way. You'll find a reflection of your parents in you. Now, your parents, if you turn out to be a complete jerk, will disown it and say, I don't understand how that kid turned out to be like that. And the people on the outside will say, yeah, I think I understand. They're just like you. You're an asshole. Your son's an asshole, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, of course, people are, no, me, I'm a great upstanding civilian. I don't understand how the kid turned out like that. Yeah, you're nothing like that, right? So my point being that a U.S. led world order would reflect not the rhetoric of the United States. A US led world order would reflect the actions of the United States. People would be similar to the United States, right? So what we're looking at from the perspective of Tony Blinken is two things. Minority rule. 4% of the world leads the other 96%. And that also implies something else. When he says the US liberal order, that also implies the cultural, political, um, leadership of the United States will be reflected in the rest of the world. There is an obvious problem with that. And the obvious problem with that, and the world knows it, that's why there is no US-led world order, right? There's no such thing, because the world understands something, particularly with a Tony Blinken, and that is that the rhetoric of the United States doesn't, in fact, match the actions of the United States. It's like I said, you can tell your kids, be nice, be nice, be nice, kids, and then they see their parents screaming and fighting all the time. They ain't going to be nice. They can see you are what your record says you are. They can see what you are, right? In the same way, the U.S. rhetoric is one of a liberal democracies, right? The U.S. rhetoric, and see, that's important when you understand Tony Blinken et al. Talking about a U.S.-led world order. That implies that the U.S. rhetoric matches the U.S. actions, that the U.S. says we want liberal democracies and that we have a liberal democracy and we promote liberal democracy. We neither have a liberal democracy. Let me give you two examples. 2016 and 2020, Bernie Sanders ran. And there was a discussion from some insiders of the Obama camp about some things that were said by Barack Obama. Apparently, one of them was, if it becomes obvious that Bernie Sanders is going to run away with this thing, then Barack Obama will have to step in. And what happened just before Super Tuesday? Barack Obama got on the phone, called all of the various candidates, said, "Okay, you stay in for that because you'll hurt Bernie. You don't stay in. You come together. You do this." There were all kinds of machinations taken by the party to ensure that Bernie Sanders didn't win. Not that if we look at Bernie Sanders today, he's some threat to the system. He played his part, but the bottom line was, in a liberal democracy, the people would choose. In the U.S. empire, that ain't happened. Jeremy Corbyn, what happened? We still have statements and statements by Mike Pompeo, then Secretary of State. And let's not forget, Mike Pompeo has never denied these statements. When it looked like Jeremy Corbyn had a chance to win, Pompeo said, if it appears that Corbyn's going to win, we won't hesitate or we won't wait to step in. In other words, the U.S. empire said there's no liberal democracy in the UK. If, in fact, it appears that somebody we don't want to win is going to win, then we'll have to act. Now, what happened as a result of that? There was a massive attack on Jeremy Corbyn. He was a Kremlin puppet. He was a Russian spy. He was an anti-Semite. He was everything bad. There was a coordinated attack on him. And we could go on and on. What happened to Tulsi Gabbard in 2016? A coordinated attack all throughout the U.S. and its vassals on her. So the bottom line is this. The U.S. empire is so fragile that it cannot afford to have someone who is not part of the empire, who is not part and partial of the criminal activity, of the militaristic, expansive nature of the empire, in charge. It can't afford that to happen. They can't afford it. They are up to so much criminal activity. If we look at what's happening with Biden right now, can Biden really afford for someone to come in, and not just Biden, the intelligence community that was involved in that we now know that's been involved in the schemes of the Biden family? Can he really afford for someone to come in, whether they're honest or not, that would seek to do an honest investigation of that? It would reveal the Biden criminality, and it would also reveal the intelligence / law enforcement community of the United States. And when I say that, I mean the DOJ, I mean the FBI. It would reveal the incestuous relationships between corrupt political corruption and the U.S. intelligence community, because I don't think Biden's corruption is the only corruption that the U.S. intelligence community is involved in. Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, on and on. You get my point. So again, what we're looking at here is a situation where we have an empire, and again, empire and democracy, those two things can't go together, but we have an empire that does not practice liberal democracy, using the rhetoric as though they do. We're promoting liberal democracy around the world when they're not. I mean, on and on and on. The United States is, how can you promote democracy when you overthrow governments? Even the rhetoric of Ukraine, we're promoting democracy in Ukraine. The United States overthrew the government of Ukraine. Venezuela, a place that I've been, that I've traveled to, that I know quite well. And what's going on there? A minority of the people, that would be the Juan Guaido faction, of political faction, the United States is promoting them. Nicaragua, the United States promoted the Contras. We see what happened right now. The Sandinistas are in power. 76% of the people in that country support the Sandinista government. Doesn't matter whether the U.S. likes it or not. That's the internal people. That's democracy. Now, what the United now you got to read into something. When Tony Blinken says we are pushing for liberal democracy, what he means is what we interpret as liberal democracy. And inherent in that statement means if it's not what we interpret as liberal democracy, we not only don't support it, we are at war with it. So when he says we're pushing for liberal democracy, what he means is we have a definition of a liberal democracy. And the liberal democracy means they do what we tell them to do. They match our rhetoric. They go along with our rhetoric. They don't argue or expose that our rhetoric is false. They come out and they say, we're a liberal democracy, which would imply that they're looking out for the people. Oh, by the way, we've got oil, we've got lithium, cacao, bananas, blah, blah, blah. The United States corporations are going to come in, they're going to extract our resources, and we're not going to get any of it. That's the bottom line. The definition of a liberal democracy outside of the United States is quite clear. It is a government that is willing to give all of their natural resources, whether you can consider labor and natural resources, etc. We're going to expose that to U.S. corporate exploitation, and the people in this country will get nothing in return. Now, of course, what is that? That's a recipe for a revolution in a particular country. But it's, who cares, because it's minority rule. It is, and generally it is 4% of the world, the United States, saying we lead a world order that benefits us. I mean, let's face it, if the US leads the world order, they're not going to do it in a way that benefits them, of course. Of course. So that's all we're looking at, realistically. If you look at what the United States tries to institute in a particular country, take Ukraine. After the United States overthrew the country of Ukraine, what did they do? They empowered the far right fascists, ultra nationalists, Azov battalions, etc. Right? These groups and organizations existed, but they weren't empowered. Once the United States took over the government, they inculcated them, instituted them into the power structure, and fed power to them. If you look at them, that what the United States do, they took the Azov and the Svobodas and the C-14s and all of these other militias and fascist groups, organizations, and political parties, and elevated and empowered them within the context of Ukraine politics, made sure that they were the power players. And what did you have there in reality? Because people will argue, well, not everybody in Ukraine is a fascist or blah, 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 blah. Well, that's true, but the United States helped to expand that particular ideology. And even if you argue, which may very well be true, that not just argue, which is absolutely true, and that is that the fascist and expansionist elements in Ukraine aren't the dominant power, shouldn't be naturally the dominant power. The U.S. came in and did what? Minority rule. Yes, they're a minority. Let's say they're 10%. Let's say they're 20%. That's still a minority. Let's not forget that Vladimir Zelensky, though the whole thing was a scheme and a fraud, but he ran on a platform of peace. And then once he got in, and he won overwhelmingly. Why? Because the people wanted peace. Because they wanted the people wanted what would be considered a liberal democracy. What would be, if you look at it, considered a liberal democracy. That's what they wanted. They wanted democracy, first of all. And democracy said that Svoboda Party and Azov, etc., would not be the ruling coalition, or even much part of the ruling coalition, because they wanted war and the people wanted peace. And they got their peace candidate, they thought. So what happened? He comes in. Now we've got minority rule in Ukraine. Actually, if we're really honest about it, It's minority proxy rule because the US rules through these groups by proxy. But even the proxy government that they have, even the proxy power structures that they have, it is a minority rule. Even though it's a fake power structure, even that's minority rule. The U.S. is saying, again, we go to Venezuela. What about Iran? There's the MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, this crazy, really fascist um, cult that the United States supports and says these people should be the real rulers of Iran. Well, in Iran, they're viewed as traitors. You know why? Because they're traitors. They fought on the side of Saddam Hussein's Iraqi military against Iran. So they are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority, but the U.S. loves minority rule. And of course, they are proxies. They are puppets for the U.S. So we would get the usual minority rule with a proxy puppet government. So Tony Blinken's U.S.-led rules-based order through and through means throughout the world, the United States would say we have a liberal democracy. Throughout the world, the United States would install minority rule all throughout the nation. The world. I would argue this. Right now, look at Europe. Do you think the Schultz government has the majority of support? No. In Germany, what you have, look at the polls. The polls would, they're saying the alternative for Deutschland, right? AFD. Right now, it wouldn't matter if it was called the Street Lamp Party. The group, the coalition of the Greens and the SPD and whoever the hell all they are now a minority as far as the popularity. What about Sunak? The people don't want Sunak. The people don't want Keir Starmer. Right now, the people would vote for, again, a street lamp. The majority of the people don't like the ruling groups that the United States have tends to, is pushing to keep in power. So what do you have? All throughout Europe, you've got minority rule, and that minority rule is starting to fall. It's fallen in Slovakia recently. So you've got countries all throughout Europe where you've got a minority. The minority says, let's keep giving all our money to Ukraine. And might I add, in order to maintain that, even modicum of that minority, they have to propagandize all of Europe and give them constant lies and constant propaganda that's untrue. The Russians are fighting with shovels. They're losing. We're sure to win. We can't possibly lose against the Russians or Putin. When he gets finished with Ukraine, he's going to continue all the way until he gets to the English Channel. That's the kind of lies and propaganda they have to get to even maintain the minority rule that they have in Europe and in the U.S. Minority rule. Let's go on. What's going on right now? Most of the country does not want Biden and Blinken and these people in charge for 4 more years or 4 more hours, for that matter. In fact, most people now look at the Republicans, look at the Democrats. It's like people looking at the Tories and looking, and the Starmer's party, right? People are looking at the two parties saying, oh, man, I don't like that. I want something different. Right now, 30% of America, Republicans, 30% Democrats, 40% neither. The groups, either of those groups that run are going to be a minority of the country. Minority rule. That's what we got here. There's no, we haven't had majority rule since what? Probably FDR. So basically, a U.S.-led world order means that the minority rule in the United States will be reflected throughout the world. The United States will be run by a minority of the people. That minority of the people in the United States will then take this so-called 4% population of the U.S. and run the rest of the world, and we will install governments throughout the world, as we're attempting to do, that are minority rule governments. And that's that. So really, that's what the U.S.-led world order is in a nutshell. It's minority rule from the U.S. extended everywhere else. Now, let's look at something that Tony Blinken said about this. Let's look at another article that I think also is important to examine. Blinken says China wants to be a dominant world power, right? So he goes on. They want to run the world. He says, this is, here's what you have. Let's go to the very last sentence. 2 sentences. I think the message that China is hearing increasingly from countries around the world is don't stir the pot. Think about that. Don't stir the pot. Don't change things. Everything's fine. Everyone wants peace and stability. I think that's fair. Everybody wants peace and stability. Well, no, that ain't. And everyone wants the status quo to be preserved. That's what Tony Blinken said, right? Everyone wants the status quo to be preserved. The question has to become, what's the status quo and who is everyone? Let me give you an example. Right now in West Africa, the West Africans are changing the status quo. They're throwing the French out. They're changing the status quo. Right now, BRICS. What is BRICS about? It's about changing the status quo. BRICS just brought in 5-6 more countries, Egypt, Argentina. So does Egypt want to maintain the status quo? Do they want to preserve it? Does Argentina? Does Saudi Arabia? On and on. The United States said, we're going to control the world oil prices, and we're going to put a cap on oil prices, right? And we're going to control the oil prices, a cap on Russian oil prices. Well, OPEC pushed back. So OPEC said, we don't like the status quo. What about South America? What about Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua? What about North Korea? On and on. When you go throughout the global south, when you go throughout Asia, when you go around the world, what you find is this. The only countries that want to maintain the status quo, and this will make sense, are countries that are benefiting from the status quo, or countries that would suffer from the fall of the status quo or a threat to the status quo, right? So the countries that are benefiting from the status quo have become nobody. Let's start there. Is the United States benefiting from the status quo? Look around. There was an article recently that said like 99% of the states in the United, 90% of the people in the US can't afford to buy a new house anymore. Right? Most people can't afford it. The price of the house has gone up. The amount of money that people make is going down. So people can't afford to buy a new house. New cars. Everything's $40,000 and $50,000 now. People can't afford a new car. What about homelessness? My God, have you seen homelessness in the United States? Let me see if I can do something. Let's do this. Let's talk. Let me show you a little bit about the status quo in the US. Let's see what we can find. Maybe we can find it.
How long you been out here?
Let's look at this. Let's take a peep at the status quo in the United States right now. Let's look at it. Let's take a look. Colorado.
I don't know, for about, I think 7 years by now. 7 or 8 years.
Do you have a plan to get out to get back in a house and shit?
I'm on disability, yeah, but that's like $2, $2 a day if you add it up, almost something. So it's like,
after all, you think Denver would learn the lesson from LA, Phoenix, and even Salt Lake City next door. It's been just over a week of me driving around this part of the country, and this is already the second time I've seen a full-blown drug mob. And people here are not too happy about this. You can imagine why. Colorado was once ranked as the best place you could live in the country. And now it's become an overpriced clone of everything wrong with the West Coast. Yep. Looking around now, it's official. This place has been Californicated. Okay, so people want to know, how bad has Denver really got? Well, walking around downtown, you see bums all over, and the sidewalks smell like poop and pee, just like they do in Oakland. On just about every block downtown, there's some troubled person that makes you feel uncomfortable walking by. Most of downtown has some stains on it now, and the parks and side streets are becoming campgrounds. Some are calling this the Portland of the Rockies now. That sucks. You do not want that, Denver. Looking around, I'd liken it more to the San Diego of the Rockies. A friend of mine told me we were trying to be like San Francisco, and we got it. Damn.
All right. So here's my point. That's the status quo that Tony Blinken is telling me. That's the U.S.-led world order right there. Tony Blinken says that everybody wants to maintain the status quo. Those people in those tents don't want to maintain the status quo. Those people that are living, looking out the window with those tents, that are walking to work and they're stepping over human feces and stepping over humans and concern disease. It's just a matter of time before these gigantic homeless encampments throughout the United States start to spread tuberculosis and cholera and all kinds of what were once considered third world diseases. And I guess I don't like to use that term. Now it's no longer third world. It's now, what is it, developing world, whatever. And so developing world diseases are coming back to the United States because you can't have that kind of squalor. The U.S. would argue that, it's the people's fault. They're all just a bunch of lazy bums. While if they would, well, how come they weren't lazy bums before the COVID crash? How come they weren't lazy bums before the 2008 crash? What happened how did the American people go from being hardworking, industrious people when we actually had industries and places where they could get a job? And what do you know? Mysteriously, when the industries and the places that they could work disappeared, they all suddenly became lazy bums. That, my friend, is the U.S.-led world order. That's the status quo that Tony Blinken is saying that he wants to save, that he wants to maintain. And the rest of us are out here doing one of two things. Either we're looking at it in aghast at what we see, concerned and worried about our own health and about the health of the people out there, or we're scared to death about being them next. There are people looking, and they're one paycheck away from pitching a tent right next to those people with all their belongings in an old rusty shopping cart. That's what we're looking at. So when Tony Blinken says to the world, hey, man, look, the world, everybody wants to maintain things as they are. Well, I'll put it to you like this. I'll put it to you like this. You're in a plane. Both engines are smoking. They're on fire, and you're heading down. You're heading down towards the earth at, some ungodly speed, and everybody's going to die in a fiery explosion on that plane. Is that a status quo that you want to maintain? Now, if you're cruising along at 30,000 feet and the plane's running fine, you can say everybody on the plane wants to maintain things the way they're going, which is the plane's cruising along and everybody's comfortable and they're serving our drinks. Right now, what is the United States? Is the United States cruising along at 30,000 feet and everybody's getting their peanuts and their drinks served? Or is the United States both engines on fire flying heading towards the ground? It is in crash mode, brother. It is in crash mode. Things are spiraling downward, out of control. So the interesting thing is, when Tony Blinken says everybody wants to maintain the status quo, the status quo right now is a rapid descension towards the ground. That's what it is. He's pretending to say that you're maintaining the status quo implies something. It implies that the status quo is sustainable, and not just sustainable, that the status quo, that the current order that's going on is what maintains stability, right? Everybody wants to keep doing this. That means we have stability. What we're doing will stay nice and smooth and even, maintain course and speed. It also implies that what we're doing is in the best interest of everybody. The truth is, when he says the U.S.-led world order, what he really means is the U.S. empire's control over the world, minority control over the world. The U.S., how is the status quo, quote, been maintained? How is this U.S.-led world order been maintained? Number one, while it was, if you can argue that there was some kind of a U.S.-led order or U.S. led world order, number one, with 850 bases. Number one, they needed guns, military all over the place to maintain this order. Why? Because if you step out of line, we'll kill you. If you don't do what we tell you to do, the way we tell you to do it, we will overthrow your country, bomb your country, kill unlimited numbers of civilians. Number one. Number two, economic coercion. We will bomb and kill you. And if for some reason we can't necessarily bomb and kill you, such as let's say Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, we will sanction you and we will use economic coercion. So we will use either physical military coercion and violence or economic coercion and violence to maintain this. So it's the equivalent of, let me put it to you like this. I'll tell you exactly what it is. And that's why I like to use this term, the mafia, right? Think about the mafia. In let's say, you know, over the course of time, and these things have been discussed and reported on, let's say Brooklyn, New York. There were families in New York and they would literally split it up, the areas up. You have this area, you have this area. For what? For their criminal activity. The mafia provides what? Break it down to economics, goods and services, whether it's drugs, whether it's prostitution, whether it's loan sharking, whether it's bookmaking, illegal betting, things of that nature. They provide goods and services, and they would break it up into an area and say, from this street over to that street, this particular crime family has that. You know, street gangs will do that. They'll say, in this area, you can sell drugs. Nobody but our people can sell drugs in this particular 10 block area, right? And then what do? Let's say the mafia says this particular area is owned by the Lucchese family, the Bonanno family, whatever, right? Famous mob families in New York. And you come in and you say, I want to open a strip joint in that area. Right. Well, there's going to be some prostitution involved in a strip joint. There's probably going to be some, you know, untoward activity and illegal activity involved, maybe some drug dealing, things of that nature. Right. The Lucchese family says you can do that. Sure. You want to open a strip joint in our area? Yes. But there's going to be what? They are a government. If you think about it, mafia is essentially a government for illicit activity in the area. And what can governments do? They can charge taxes. So the mafia will say, you want to, the Lucchese family says, we have this area. You want to open a strip joint, which is going to certainly involve other illicit activities. No problem. You can do it, but you got to pay us what's called street tax. You got to give us a percentage of your profit or percentage of what you bring, or whatever, maybe 50% of whatever number they say. You're opening this, you're going to give us a percentage of this. That's the street tax. Why? Because they're government. And what happens if you don't? Well, we'll burn the place down. We'll shoot people. We will utilize violence. That's what the mafia does. The mafia doesn't just come out and utilize violence for no reason. They're not going to come to you and they're not going to say to you, look, we're just going to kill you because we're in a bad mood. What they'll say is, you want to open a strip joint in this region, and we'd love for you to do that because that brings in lots of money. We just got to get our piece of it. So way to go. You open that strip joint or whatever it is you're opening, and you can do that, and we just get a piece of the action. And then you'll say, well, what's in it for me? Oh, that's easy. Nobody can touch you. You won't be robbed. You won't have to worry about crime. You ain't got to lock your doors. You won't have to lock your doors at night. You can walk around and walk out to your car dangling money. Ain't nobody going to touch you because everybody will know that that strip joint is mob protected. And if somebody comes in to rob you, they're a dead man. Everybody will know, leave that strip joint alone. That's a Lucchese family strip joint. You touch that, you're dead. So ain't nobody going to do that. So they will utilize violence to either force you to comply with the street tax or whatever it is they want you to do, or they will use violence if you come to power to protect you from anyone else. But they're going to use violence. That's what they're going to do. The Blinken people, these neocons, they're mafia. They're mafia. They go around the world and they utilize violence. Hey, that's a nice country you got. We want a piece of it. You got lithium. We want a piece of it. The problem is that they're even more vile. They're even more violent. They're even more greedy than the mafia. The mafia will say, we want a piece of that, your action. And we're going to leave you with enough. They may say 50%, but that still leaves you with enough to stay in business. And might I add, the mafia may direct everybody towards you. The mafia will say nobody else can open a strip joint within X amount of blocks of this. They will make sure that you make money because they get a piece of it. So the mafia is going to be like, look, we're getting 50%. We don't want you to make 200,000 a year. We want you to make 1.2 million a year because we get half of it. They will do things to ensure that you get money. Whereas the neocons are so treacherous, they won't even do that. They'll say, look, we're going to put somebody in charge of your country. And you got lithium, right? Yeah. Okay, we want the lithium. Your country will say, your government will say, well, look, in order for us to stay in power, how about we give you 80% of the lithium and we keep 20% of it to go to the people so they'll be cool and they won't be on to us that we're robbing them blind. The U.S. empire will say, nah, we want 100% of the lithium. We're going to put a government in charge of this country that gives us all. We ain't leaving anything for the people. The mafia will at least leave something for the people who own the business so they can stay not the blinking people. Nope. We want all of your lithium. We want all your oil. We want all of everything you have. And we're going to put somebody in power in your country that'll give us everything. And we're going to have to use violence. We'll simply say, oh, we're coming to that country to fight terrorism. Well, they support this terrorist organization. They put them in that country, and then they say we got to be in that country to fight terrorism, and they actually use those terrorist groups to fight against the people that they want. So the country gets nothing out of it. That's the U.S.-led world order. The U.S.-led world order is I come to your country and I take everything you have and I put some puppets in charge, and you get nothing, and your country is destabilized and it falls apart, which is great because it makes it even easier for us to steal your stuff. It's the worst. And what do we have now? We have a world in which people throughout the world now actually believe that they can get out from under that US-led world order. That's what's going on now. For years, people didn't, either one of two things. Either they weren't in a country where they were suffering from the U.S. empire and U.S. imperialism and U.S. domination and coercion, so they didn't know what was going on, how bad it was for those who were in those countries suffering, or if they were in a country suffering, they felt like there was no way out. The U.S. empire was so powerful, there was no way to resist this kind of international power. Thus comes in Russia and China. The United States then sees threats to the world order. And Tony Blinken says that China wants to be the dominant world power and replace the U.S.-led liberal world order. All he's saying is, look, man, we can't allow that. We think somebody else wants to be the dominant power. It's not what China wants. Because China has made it clear, we don't want to run the world. China, in fact, if you look at it, they focused, most of their money is focused on China. The only reason they're really building up their military is because the United States is trying to surround them with bases. And might I add, Blinken and his people imply that a US-led world order is a natural order of things, that this is just the way things should be. Bees and flowers go together. One could argue that with no bees, no flowers, no bees, which means that bees and flowers are what? They're a field of activity. If one doesn't exist without the other, what's the difference? You have to have a brain and a heart makes you a human. No brain, no heart, no human. No human, no brain, no heart. A human's brain and heart. This is one field of activity. Bees and flowers are a field of activity, right? Tony Blinken implies that the U.S. using its power to maintain hegemony over the world is a natural field of activity. It's as natural as bees and flowers. But the problem is this. I don't see anything in that field. I don't see pollen saying, hey, man, we don't like this. Pollen's like, hey, this is cool. This works for us. I don't see flowers or bees. I don't see anything in that field of activity pushing back saying this doesn't work for us. The field of activity that is bees and flowers works for the flowers. It works for the bees. Everybody benefits from it. Wherein the field of activity that is the world's the U.S.-led world order, as Blinken calls it, isn't even working for the U.S. Let me see if I can find. There's a great article that I have. Do I have it? There's a great article. I don't know. Let me see. Here we go. Basically, I don't see it, but basically there's an article out and it's talking about Americans and how the people that support the United States government. Maybe I sent it. Oh, here we go. Let's look at this. Does it work? Does it even work for the US? Let's look at this. This is important. Important article in case you've seen it. So we're covering a few articles today that are critical. Look at this. If I can ever find the damn thing on my whatchamacallit. Americans' dismal views of the nation's politics. Now, it's critical to look at this in light in the context of what we're talking about, a US-led international order, because again, that implies that this order is something that works. It's in the interest of everyone, right? Everybody is in the interest, and the US is leading it. In order to make the argument that this order is in the best interest and is beneficial for everyone, it certainly implies that it's in the best order, in the best interest and beneficial for the people here in the United States. Why would the people of the world want an order that doesn't even work for us? The U.S. is going to impose an order on the world. Does that order work for the United? Oh, yes, it works great for us. You're going to love it too. But what happens if it doesn't? Let's look at this. 65% say they always or often feel exhausted when thinking about politics. Let's look at this. There is a new Pew Research study of the state of the nation's politics finds no single focal point for the public's satisfaction. There is widespread criticism of three branches of government, both political parties as well as political leaders and candidate for office. Let's start here. 4% of U.S. adults say the political system is working extremely or very well. Another 3% say somewhat well. 6 in 10, 63%, express not too much or no confidence at all in the future of the U.S. political system, the future of the system. So Tony Blinken saying, we want to maintain an order. And 63% of the people in your own country don't have confidence in the future of this system. How about this? Positive views of many government and political institutions are at historic lows. 16% of the public say they trust the federal government always or most of the time. What the hell is wrong with that 16%? Trust hovered near historic lows for the better part of the last 20 years. Today, it stands among the lowest levels dating back nearly 7 decades, right? So Americans, number one, they think the political system is not working. Number two, they have a negative view of the institutions of power. A growing share of the public dislikes both political parties. Nearly 3 in 10 express unfavorable views of both parties, the highest share in 3 decades, and a comparable share of adults, 25%, do not feel well represented by either party, right? So you got about a quarter of the people, somewhere between a quarter and a third, saying these political parties are worth a crap, right? And again, the rest of them, obviously, they're like, my party's okay. No, my party's okay. And then a third, somewhere around a third of the people are like, both of them are crap. Let's continue. Majorities back age and term limits and eliminating the Electoral College. What is the Electoral College about? Number one, it's not democracy. It means that the person who comes in second can win. And in 2 of the last 4 elections, the person who came in second did win. So most people in America, majorities, let's see, we got any numbers here. Large shares of Americans support various changes to political system, including long-term proposals establishing term limits for members of Congress and scrapping the Electoral College. Age limits for both federal elected officials and members of the Supreme Court draw broad support, right? So the bottom line is most people are saying, look, man, I'm unhappy with the people, with the way our government works. I'm unhappy with the political parties. I'm unhappy with the institutions. We need massive change. Candidates' choices are underwhelming. 63% of Americans say they are dissatisfied with the candidates who have emerged so far. Setting aside the presidential campaign, there's been a downward trend in views of the quality of all political parties. 26% rate the quality of political candidates as very or somewhat good, right? Down 20 percentage points since 2018. Down 20 percentage points in 5 years. So what we're looking at is what? We're looking at a country, at Tony Blinken saying, that's important to look at this, and it is critical to look at the state of the United States, to look at the state of politics in the United States, the stability of politics in the United States, and whether or not the people feel that they are adequately being represented, whether they support the government. It's critical to look at that in light of the comment of the statements that Tony Blinken has made. How can you say, right? I'll put it to you like this. It's like a soccer coach saying, look, everybody wants people to coach their soccer team exactly like us. Everybody around the world wants their soccer team to be coached exactly like ours, to practice the same way, to run the same offense, defense, everything, to select their players. Everybody wants their soccer club to be run like ours. Well, let's poll the players. And you poll the players, and most of the players say, we don't like the coach. We don't like the way he practices. We're not winning. We're getting worse. And when you talk to the fans, what do you think, fans? I hate the uniforms. I hate the name. I hate everything about our soccer club. So you've got a soccer club that says everybody around the world should run their soccer clubs exactly like ours, but the players are unhappy with the club. You've got a losing record. The fans don't like the club. Nobody's unhappy with the club, happy with the club. But you argue everybody wants what we have. I know several people literally who have left the United States due to the instability of the United States, who just said, I got to get out of here. This place is falling apart. This is not an instance where people are like, hey, we got to go to the United States, where everybody around the world can't wait to get to the United States. There was a time when that was true. It ain't true no more. There's a lot of people trying to get the hell out because they see this thing collapsing. So a U.S.-led world order is a minority, but it's a minority order led by a collapsing country. It simply means the U.S. empire. What Tony Blinken, when they say, I'll put it like this, everyone wants the status quo. Let me reflect that back to something when Tony Blinken said that, right? Everyone wants to maintain the status quo. Everyone. Let's go back to a statement. At the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine, Joe Biden said what? The whole world supports us. Everybody in the world supports us. But when you looked at it, nobody in the Muslim world supported us, supported the Biden administration's war on Russia. Most of the Eurasia didn't. Most of Asia didn't. Nobody in South America, Latin America, Central America, nobody in Africa. So what happened? What happened when Tony Blinken says everybody? When Joe Biden says the whole world, right? What they're talking about is something very specific. They're not even talking about the West when he says the whole world. They're not talking about the West. They're not even talking about the United States. What they're talking about is the people that are important to them. What they're talking about is everyone only includes the elite ruling class. The people who now and the schmucks that still support that, right? There is a political strain throughout the West that still supports the neocons no matter what they do. And what Blinken and Biden are saying really is those are the only people we really see as humans that matter. The people that don't support us, when they say everybody supports us, it's another way of saying those who don't support us, we don't recognize them as humans. We don't recognize them as important. That's the majority of the world. We want to maintain the status quo. Well, who's fighting against the status quo? We don't recognize them as human beings. That's why the Blinkens and the Bidens, et cetera, can go around the world and just go to some country and bomb everybody and kill everybody because they don't see them as human beings that matter. They are in the way and they need to be eliminated so that the U.S.-led world order can continue. And it's the same thing they see here. They don't see those people that are homeless living in tents as human beings. Neoliberalism says if you're suffering, it's your own fault. If you're poor, it's your own fault because you're lazy. But neoliberalism also creates a dynamic that creates more poor and poverty and suffering. That's the status quo, a status quo that's going down. The problem is this. If this U.S.-led world order was so beneficial, why is anybody fighting against it? See, what Tony Blinken has to say, when he says everybody wants to maintain the status quo. What he's really saying is this: there's nobody pushing back or fighting against this US-led world order. Nobody's trying to stop this. Nobody in their right mind. It's going along smoothly. He doesn't, in his rhetoric, even acknowledge the level of opposition to the neocon ideology. They can't acknowledge it. They can't acknowledge that, because that would put them out of their narrative where the whole world supports the neocon ideology. The supports imperialism, world domination by 4% of the world population, minority rule. But the reality is this: now Blinken and Biden's and their crew are trying to hold on to something that's already gone. The people in the world are pushing back. They're trying to keep something that isn't even there. It reminds me, I spoke of a book that I have about sitting behind me called Simulacra and Simulacrum, where the discussion is about this. It's interesting. People who are trying to recreate something that only exists in their mind, right? What happens if you believe that at one time the world was a certain way? Your country was a certain way, your city was a certain way, and you're working to bring your city, your country back to that. You're to return to those halcyon days, right? We're going to get back to the days when everybody had this and that, and everything was fair and everything's wonderful. But those days never really existed. Everything was fair then. Everything was good then. We're going to recreate that. But those days never really existed. So what you're trying to do is it's simulacrum. You're trying to simulate something that never existed in the first place. So what you argue you're trying to recreate is actually a new creation, because that never existed. What Tony Blinken is saying is we're going to hold on and maintain this rules-based international order. There never was a rules-based international order. There never was. And might I add, we're going to hold on to this US-led world order. Here's the problem. You're trying to hold on to something that ain't there. You know, some guy is falling in the water and he reaches to grab for this. He sees something there. Well, let me do it different. Let's do it a different way. Guy's wandering through the desert. He looks and he sees an oasis ahead. But it's just a mirage. It's all in his mind. There is no oasis. And he's crawling. If I could only make it to the oasis, and he sees palm trees and waterfalls and beautiful women with, bikinis dancing around the, serving food, and everything he could possibly imagine is at this oasis. And just when he gets there, he reaches out for the edge of the palm trees. He flops on the ground. It's just sand. It was all a mirage. It was never there. He was fighting to make it to something that didn't even exist. What's happened now? If you look at what's happening, even Tony Blinken's discussion to say everybody wants the status quo. Everybody wants to maintain the status quo. Why are you going after China? Because they're trying to change the status quo. Why are you going after Russia? They're trying to change the status quo. Why are you going after Iran, Venezuela, Cuba? They're trying to change the status quo. What was that again? Everybody wants to maintain the status quo. Those two things don't go together. Literally to say everybody wants to maintain the status quo, and we've got to stop China and Russia and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba. Why? Because they're trying to change the status quo. Those two things don't go together, do they? Do they make sense? Everybody wants to change the status quo. I mean, nobody wants to change it, and we got to fight these people because they're trying to change it. He acknowledges that what he's saying is false as it comes out of his mouth. The discussion is about China wants to become the dominant world power. Well, whether they do or not is irrelevant to this conversation. I think China is trying to grow and they have a right to. But Tony Blinken says they're trying to change the status quo. Really? They do? No. Everybody wants to maintain. Let me find this real quick. No, I lost it, so screw it. I'm not going to go chasing this around. But my point is, even in Tony Blinken's own speech, he creates a contradiction that should be obvious to everybody, right? So there are countries that were fighting to stop. He's fighting to maintain the status quo. If everybody wants to maintain the status quo, you don't have to fight. It's a natural order. Do you see bees and flowers? Do you see bees are fighting to maintain their field of activity, their status quo? The flowers want out. The flowers are on strike. Pollen is on strike. Pollen says, no more bees. They're holding up sign. No more bees. No, we're being exploited by bees. So the pollen is now in complete revolt. Why? It's not working for you. No, we're tired of being turned into honey, for God's sake. We just want to chill out here. We're trying to maintain, right? So guess what? You don't see that happening. Why? Because the pollen's cool with everything that happens. The bees are cool. They're just like, hey, we're bees. It's just what we do. How about you, flowers? Flowers are like, yeah, we're down with this, man. Let's carry on, maintain course and speed. But we've got a world order, a natural field of activity, according to Tony Blinken, that must be defended, right? It's almost like when people say, it's almost like when Sarah Ashton Cirillo the other week was like, yes, we're going to stop the Russian propagandists and hunt them down. Why? We're doing it for God, which maintains that God, this is what God wants. Doesn't that imply that God can't get it done? Well, you're doing it for God. Can God do it? No, he can't possibly do that. It's too much work for him. It's a little complicated. So God called us and it's like, hey, man, I can't get this done. Can you guys handle it? Sure, God, you can't do it, but we got it covered. Something odd there. There's a strange and odd contradiction that you believe in a God that we must all worship because he's super powerful. He made everything, but for some reason he can't stop those Russian propagandists. That doesn't make sense, does it? In the same way, Blinken contradicts himself, and he has to contradict himself. And it's beautiful because it demonstrates to the world the contradictory rhetoric that the U.S. empire uses to maintain empire. First of all, empire and democracy are fundamentally incompatible. We can't have a democracy. The U.S. can't have a democracy. Because if we ever get to a democracy, the empire will fall. Most people in America don't want an empire because an empire doesn't work in the best interest of the people of the empire. The empire has to look. What would Americans prefer? A money to build a new base in Finland right now, or money to address the homelessness? Money to build a new base in the Arctic right now with more missiles and bombers and things, or to build a new factory in somewhere in Wisconsin, so the average everyday schmuck can have a job working in that factory making widgets, right? What would most Americans prefer? To use the money to give the CIA millions of dollars so they can walk around the Middle East bribing people? They can go to Pakistan and bribe people to throw Imran Khan out? Or would Americans prefer that money is used to fill potholes and build new roads and fix our infrastructure and things like that? What would most Americans prefer? Clearly, the people of the empire would prefer, as we hear over and over, that the money is spent on the people here. But they ain't getting that. That just isn't what's going to happen. So fundamentally, empire is incompatible with democracy. If the people are allowed to vote, they may vote Trump, they may vote Bernie Sanders, they may vote Rand Paul, they may vote any damn body they want, RFK Jr. or Cornel West or somebody, whoever they want, they'll vote in. That ain't happening here. They can't allow that to happen. We have a system that must be manipulated to maintain the status quo, or people like Tony Blinken will go to jail. These people are criminals. In a democracy, Tony Blinken and his people will get locked up and go to jail. So they can't have it. So if they can't have democracy here, they sure as hell can't promote democracy anywhere. And the world knows it. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'd like to go further. I'd like to run. But the bottom line is this. The U.S.-led world order means what? Minority rule. A minority of the people rule the world, and that minority is the richest minority. They don't have the interest of the masses. They don't. That's not their compass. That's not their guiding rule. Their guiding rule is to enrich themselves and to maintain power. And now they're so corrupt and crooked, they have to keep themselves out of jail. A big part of it is in the Biden administration, in the intelligence community. Well, a big part of, before I'll say this, a big part of what they're doing is, whether it's Russiagate, whether it's Ukraine Gate, Biden, etc., they have become so corrupt. They have to do things to ensure that they're not held accountable for their own actions. They've been involved in so many crimes that they can't afford for the American people to elect someone that will look at them and actually examine those crimes. So they're trying to maintain power, and they're trying to hide, or they're trying to escape accountability for their crimes. They're desperate now. Tony Blinken can't say, sure, everybody just come out and investigate everything I've done for the past 5 years. He'd be at The Hague tomorrow. He'd be in jail here for election interference in 2020. He'd be in jail everywhere, and he'd have a whole, or his whole crew would be in jail with him, both here and abroad. So they cannot afford justice. They cannot afford accountability. They have to fight against it. So we've got a status quo now that literally fights for minority rule, fights against justice and accountability, both in the United States and abroad, and works against the interests of democracy everywhere. Thanks a lot, everybody. I share this all over the place. Share it on, I'm not on Twitter anymore. Share this on all of your platforms if you can, if you like it. If not, that's fine. Also, if you can afford it, you can go to Patreon. Buymeacoffee.com is great. Or I've got my Cash App information up there with PayPal. There's a lot of ways to support the channel if you can afford it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. I'm out.